Hello, it's Monday again. I'm in autumnal colours. I don't know why. It isn't autumn, is it? But never mind. It feels like the days are brighter, so therefore I'm preparing for spring. Does anybody else feel like that at the moment? I'm in a seasonal mood. I don't know whether it's just me. Anybody go to a beer garden at the weekend? I did. First time in 20 years. Did an interview with the BBC today, and that was one of the main questions. Not that I'd gone to a beer garden, but they couldn't believe I hadn't been to a beer garden for 20 years. That was the main concern. But what I meant was, I have been to a pub. I have been to a place which sells beer. But I just haven't been in the garden because I'm a woman. And I don't know about a lot of you females out there, but I feel the cold. I'm the woman who, even when it's nice outside, is by the fire inside, imagining I'm in a scene from a Dickensian novel. But this weekend, because we weren't allowed into pubs, I went to a beer garden, a massive farm beer garden. God, they've got it right. It's a working farm, but they've turned a massive area of it into a beer garden, and they sell pizza, including vegan pizza, which I thought was momentous, I'm not going to lie, it meant I ate a pizza. And it was rammed. It was rammed. There wasn't a mask in sight. People were smiling. People came over and had a chat with me, were telling me how fantastic it was to be out, and for like 2 minutes I was like, oh my God, this is what life is meant to be like, isn't it? So it was kind of a nice Saturday. I don't know about you guys. Any of you, let me know. Did you go out? Have you been out? Are you afraid of going out? Because I have been. Not gonna lie, own all my own feelings, as you know. I've had fear of going out. Still don't like going to supermarkets. Still don't like it when people look like they want to dodge around you because they think you're some kind of vector of disease, which I completely understand because of the narrative and all the things that have gone on. But it was so nice. And it was like, on that mental health level, guys, we all need to do it, don't we? We all need to just get out more. I'm not meaning go to drink, obviously. I was driving, let me tell you, so I wasn't there for alcohol. But the point is, it was just such a lovely connection. And the most beautiful thing was that people who I didn't know were just coming and having a chat. Some of them were like 15-minute monologues, which were brilliant. They were so drunk, but they were hilarious. It was fantastic. And the point is, it just reminded me of what we've been lacking in the past 12 months. So for any of you who have a fear of going out, you have to set yourself some tasks this week. That's what I'm doing. Like, set yourself some tasks to go and be social. If you're scared of catching the virus, you're gonna have to start facing the fact that you cannot live your life permanently inside. You can't. Also, everyone needs to reframe that we are always gonna face viruses. We're always gonna face risk. 6 people a year die falling out of bed. But most of us do like going to bed. And it's about recognising that even the most mundane of things carries some risk. And if you start thinking about it that way, it can really help to reduce that fear. And it's done me the world of good because there were a few things that really kind of clicked into place, which is firstly, there was about 2,000 people there, all of whom clearly just wanted to be around other human people. So it's that sense of so many of us feel exactly the same way. And mentally, you could see the way that people's minds were shifting and lifting because we're social creatures and we need each other. But also, I think for me, it was that sense of, actually, I'm not as fearful of the world outside as I thought I was. You know, my confidence isn't quite as broken as I thought it was. And until you test yourself, you're not going to know. So that's my beginning of advice. It's not so much a rant as a little bit of reinforcement about what we all need. Because we all need it, right? Secondly, before I start, I keep saying that new features on my Appy app will be out, but they are literally going to be out in the next 24 hours. So for those of you who are already on my app, for those of you who don't know what my app is, Appy is fitness, nutrition, wellbeing, and basically everything you need for health, wealth, and kind of wellness in that area. And it's completely free forever. But one of the things that I wanted to do was have like a light social network where you can just chat to each other like you do, I guess, on Facebook and Twitter without the trolling and all of that. So it's been meant to have been launched for about 2 weeks, but hasn't as yet because it's really hard developing apps. But the consequence is it will be up soon, so I'm excited about that. So for those of you who haven't downloaded it, do download it. For those of you who have downloaded it, make sure in the next 24 hours you kind of go and have a look, because it means that we'll be able to start chatting to each other, as in just like little general conversations. You can still like post videos and pictures and all of the things in between, but it's also going to be shareable with other platforms. I'm really excited about that. So if you haven't been on there, go on there. If you have been on there, just look out for that, and it's going to be miles easier to find people and follow people and just everything in between. I've had to sell a kidney, but apart from that, it's fine. Okay, let's get on with tonight's mental health session. And apologies if you're joining me for the first time. We do talk about mental health, we talk about everything in between, but I do tend to just start the session with a ramble. Thanks for all the comments, by the way. For those of you who saw me on this morning, it was so lovely being with Phil in particular and Rochelle. It was really nice to be back, and thank you for the nice comments. It was very lovely. I do enjoy my phone-ins there. It may be my favourite job in the whole universe. I love writing for Closer too, but the point is, I just love the phone-ins. That's why I do these, because it's fab. Gets to interact with people like you all the time. Oh, Holly Rutter, it is your birthday. Well, what a time for a birthday. I mean, if you were going to plan having a birthday, it's a pretty good time to have it, because you can actually go out without getting arrested for being around people. So I hope that you are doing something fun, frolicking. I would imagine dancing should be involved, and if not, please, after this session, immediately crank up the tunes and do so. And I hope that you're having a great day and that people bought you presents that are ace. I'm one of those people that when people ask me what I want for my birthday, I do this, I go, money. And it's amazing how such a simple order can just be for money, and a bra, money, a bag, money, just shit I don't need, you know? Just like, how is it possible that such a, what do you want? Money. No, never happens. Although if my sister's listening, I do very much like my necklace. But happy birthday, Holly. Sorry, start with a bit of a laugh. How do you feel about Nikki from Big Brother? Gutted. I feel gutted about Nikki from Big Brother because I knew her, and I knew her personally. And I did at one point talk very regularly to Nikki. We crossed paths because we had the same agent. And there are different levels as to why I feel gutted about Nikki. First off, she was truly one of the loveliest girls that you could have met. I mean, I know that you see the caricatures on TV, and this is what reality television does a lot. And putting it back to Big Brother 7, which is where Nikki was, with respect to her and that group, Pete and all those involved, is a very real Big Brother, wasn't it? It was before the time that reality TV would cast characters. And it's one of the reasons I don't do psychological evaluations for people going into reality TV. I don't think it's that healthy a lot of the time. And even though there are some people who do brilliantly and thrive, it also has its casualties. And I think Nikki thrived. I genuinely think going on Big Brother was something that was incredibly powerful for her, and we got to see this caricature of a personality. But as a human being away from that whole situation, she was just really genuine. She was incredibly authentic. She was incredibly kind. When she spoke, she would speak in such a kind way about the world. So I'm gutted that the world has lost a lovely human being. I'm also annoyed, stroke relatively incensed, that one of the problems that we have is that we're still not treating eating disorders in a way where we get success rates that we should get. So when I did my masters, I refused to actually put any of the literature in my discussion, and I had to fight really hard for that because you have to in a masters. But the reason I did it was because the research says that you are as likely to get well without intervention as you are with, and at that point I don't feel that I need to engage any further with the literature out there because we need to do a better job. And for me, knowing that she'd had treatments 5 or 6 times and they'd failed, that says something about us needing to rethink the strategies around how we deal with EDs, because it's all focused on food a lot of the time, and eating disorders are not to do with food. Food is the outlet, it's the withholding or the purging or the gorging, but it's not the food. And weight is not the issue. I always think that eating disorders, particularly anorexia, you scream sickness. People are literally screaming sickness with their bodies. Their bodies is carrying their pain in a way where they are so physically distorted, they're actually connecting with the world in that way, so there's a great deal of pain being expressed in the body. And I feel really sad that Nikki, who was somebody who managed to get to better points, lost all of the coping mechanisms that she should have had. I mean, I don't think it takes a genius to question the impact of complete social isolation, not being able to go to a gym, not being able to have the support frameworks that you used to. In her case, not being able to go on holiday, which was something that was really important. And also, she was training to work with special needs, so there was also a vocational issue. All of those things that transpire and connect, they're contributory factors. And no one ever likes to talk about these things because it seems to me that in mental health, we like to imagine that there is a simple black and white. You either survive or you don't, as if there is no in between. And for me, every loss of an eating disordered individual is a completely avoidable scenario. Every suicide, in my opinion, is a completely avoidable scenario. It blows my mind that we're still seeing such levels. And when we come to talk about eating disorders, we can say that there's been a big rise. And again, why has there been a big rise? Well, because people have had a lack of autonomy, people have had a lack of support, services are overwhelmed. And when I say that, to make it clear, because I know a lot of mental health practitioners also come on my lives and listen, that is not a judgment towards them. Because I'm telling you now, I know clinical psychologists and I know mental health nurses, and their workloads are unbelievably intense to the point where I think it's almost impossible not to burn out. So it's not that there isn't this emphasis on trying, it's just that the need exceeds by far the actual services that are available, which is why charities come in and even they are overburdened. So I'm very conflicted about how I feel regarding Nikki's death, because on one level, it's really not helpful to point blame at people and those in charge of, shall we say, being the mental health minister. It's very hard not to point fingers at them, but I don't think probably it's the right thing to do. I think it's more about how do we look at these lessons and then think about how we can do a better job. But she was really lovely, and I say that from a very personal perspective. She was a really, really lovely human. And unlike a lot of reality TV where I think, arguably some have been spat out, I don't think she was. I think that she was really embraced, but TV careers are fleeting. One day I'll just be a distant memory off screen, and that's fine. I think it worked for her. I think she had an incredibly lovely family, and I think that it just reminds us that so many people during this last 12 months have struggled intensely and immensely, and I think all of us know individuals or feel it personally ourselves. Hi Emma, I'm looking for advice about how to talk to my 16-year-old daughter about sex and how to know what's right and wrong. She's in a relationship. When I go to talk to her, she gets embarrassed and says, I don't want to hear it. I can imagine it. I don't want to hear it, Mum. Don't say anything. Don't say the S word. Also, should I talk to my 12-year-old daughter at the same time, or is she too young? My parents didn't have a sex talk with me, so I just want to prepare my daughters so they know what's in front of them. Any advice would be much appreciated. I still have a very sexual relationship. Great. So a few things there. Wouldn't do it together. Only reason being, if they were both 12, or one was 12 and one was 8, I would say probably together is a good time. But because you've got kind of a developmental difference, it's quite distinct, 12 and 16. 16-year-olds feel shame, humiliation and embarrassment like that. It just flares up. And the idea of using a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old in the same moment to express that probably will just shut down your elder daughter. Just because, firstly, she won't be able to relate to a 12-year-old having that conversation. And secondly, she's already really embarrassed at the fact that you might have an idea that she might be or is having sex with her boyfriend. But the really positive bit is you absolutely are in the right ballpark wanting to have that conversation. I don't know about many of you. I grew up, particularly in the 80s, where when we were talked to about periods, and this literally is what happened, a woman came into the class, stood at the front of the class, took out a tampon, and then put it in a plate of water. That was the amount of education I had on having a period. And let me tell you, when you start your period, taking that tampon and putting it in a bowl of water is not something that's useful. Just to point out, you know, literally very unhelpful. Turns out it's a completely different situation unless you read the instructions and find out before. So I guess that when it comes down to having that conversation, first of all, it's about helping her understand that you are an individual who's been there. And I think that's the problem when we're parents and we're trying to have a conversation with our children. We see ourselves as eternally young. We do. It's like when I'm talking to my son's friends, there's a part of me that's like, yeah, just like hanging out with these kids, like kind of the same age, and like I'm 150 years old to them. But the point is, you know, you never really grow out of the sense of who you are, because you are the same human being that you were when you were 16, 18, 20. Yes, we get wiser and more wrinkly, and we get hopefully a little bit more solid in our attitudes to the world. But we don't transcend who we used to be. So when you are cool, calm and collected and you're going to have a conversation with your daughter, she's looking at this mother, and mother has all these stereotypes associated with it. And one of those associations is that, you know, your mum doesn't want you to have sex, so you're like 67, and only then when you've been married 15 years. There are these kind of really clear stereotypes. So I think the most important thing to do is to not do it direct face to face. And face to face always feels a little bit confrontational or interrogative. So first off, get out on a walk. Literally do something side by side. Once you're side by side, you can talk about these things. Secondly, don't skirt around the issue at all. Be very direct with her. Simply say to her, as your mother, it's really important that I have a conversation with you about sex and protection, because you're 16, you're in a relationship, you're legally allowed to have sex now. I want to make sure that you're protected. I'm a woman, I've had children, I've done it, I've been there, I still have it. That means that I am in a good position to make you feel at ease when it comes down to asking questions. And there are reasons for that. So first of all, you want her to feel at ease with the fact that, is she protected? She may not be having sex at this moment in time, but if she's thinking of, or is, has she got access to the right kind of protection? Is she on the pill? Does she realise that if she is on the pill, she can still get STIs because she's not using a condom, for example? Those conversations need to happen, and she needs to hear them. Secondly, I think it's really important to make it clear that your openness extends to all areas around sex and her sexuality and the way that she interacts in that way. So I think when you broaden that conversation, you can say to her things about the fact that it's really important that she gets what she needs when she's at that point, or that she doesn't feel under pressure, or that she can ask questions that relate to sexual behaviour and conduct. Because you want your children to feel that you are that individual that firstly won't condemn, secondly won't judge, but most importantly will celebrate the development that she's going through, and also be able to manage the pain if things don't work out in the long term. So I think you've got to be really direct in that context. Now with the 12-year-old, I think it's a great age to start having those conversations. 12-year-olds are a lot more inquisitive and curious. They're less likely to be embarrassed, and they're more likely to ask questions. So again, I wouldn't do it in a direct way. I'd do it that side-by-side conversation. With your 16-year-old, if she said, I don't want to hear, you're going to have to be really direct and say, well, it's not about whether you want to hear. It's about me as a mother doing my job. And you're going to be a mother one day through the way that we're talking about now. And actually, that's really important for me as a mother to know that I've done my job correctly. So own it in that respect. As in, you may not want to hear this, and I get that it feels a bit awkward, but this is for me as a mother. I want you to understand that when you look back, you don't think that I didn't give you the right advice or I didn't protect you enough. And I have talked very openly about the fact that even as young teenagers, I advised my children of the type of pornography to watch. Now, that wasn't because I wanted them to watch pornography at all. I don't have an issue with it. Whatever you're into, as long as you're not harming another person, knock yourself out. Personally, of course, as a mother, I would rather my children not necessarily have been interested in that kind of area, but they are young boys. The internet has loads of free porn. They're going to watch it. So I knew that, so I had to educate them on what kind of porn would be the least damaging for them, sexual performance-wise, in the future. And I did that, and they both took that advice. And because of that, I think they genuinely hold women in high regard and don't look at the type of pornography that, in my opinion, makes women look like they're meant to enjoy something that seems incredibly painful and not very enjoyable at all. And so I think the more that we can expand those conversations, the better. And that's for everybody listening. We should be having open, direct conversations with our children about sex and relationships as early as we can. Firstly, to remove any shame, any fear, any confusion. And secondly, because they're going to become sexual beings, but the more empowered they are, the more they understand what it's about. The actual research suggests the less likely they are to get into relationships that are negative or too early for them. So as opposed to this idea that having a conversation about sex with our kids is breaching their childhood naivety and will only lead to them running off and being promiscuous, it's quite the contrary, because it's not a secret, it's not hidden, it's not shameful, it's not naughty, it's not mischievous, it's not any of those things. It's just human, and it's adult play. And also, with those of you who've got kids who are younger, you need to be able to let them know that there are really clear rules and regulations. Like, you can get into serious trouble, whether we agree with this or otherwise. If you're a 16-year-old and you're sleeping with a 14-year-old, you can get in serious trouble. If you're a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old and you're sending each other intimate pictures of one another, you can sign the sex offenders register. That's how serious it is. So the more we equip our children, the better it is. Equally, having conversations about consent. You may not believe it, because when you think back to the 80s and 90s, it wasn't something that really people would think about. But when it comes down to consent, if a girl is drunk, she cannot legally consent. So essentially, if that happens, there is a cause there for criminal prosecution to take place. So unless we tell our boys and our girls about this, how can they be protected? How can they be equipped? How can they be safe? So definitely have that conversation. And like I said, direct is good. The ones that drove me mad when parents just like leave a book on the side, you know, like just pop a book on periods on the side of the bed or developing bodies. And it's like, no, it's ridiculous. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. Because if you're telling me that I've got to have silence around this subject, you're informing me that there must be something shameful about it. So never do that. I know that I've seen professionals, I've seen people on TV, I've seen doctors' advices. Just leave a book for them so that they can read it. And my mind just goes, it's like, no. That would suggest that there is something that has to be not spoken about. And also, like, your child's instantly going to be, oh my God, mum or dad have just left me this book. What the hell are they thinking about, you know? That kind of thing is really important. So always, always, always be very open. In fact, I would say it's better not to say anything than to leave that book on the bedside table, in my opinion. Hi Emma, I tried to kill myself again on Thursday. Medical staff at hospital were great and even insisted my friend stayed with me because I didn't even know my name. The next day, the liaison team sent me home because according to them, I'm okay because I have a job. My GP doesn't understand it and nor do I. It just seems really unfair. Sorry. So I'm taking from that you feel that you would like to be an inpatient and that you don't feel that they've met your needs. And I think that when you're dealing with a mental health crisis, first of all, being made to feel that there are people taking you really seriously is so paramount. So I'm sorry that you feel that that didn't translate. It does feel like when you first arrived there, you actually got what I would consider an excellent response, which was to be cared for compassionately and also to have a friend stay with you. because that demonstrates that the staff there were really compassionate and understood that you were in complete distress. Now, I don't know what happens during the translation of that experience to potentially the changeover of staff and the way that you're viewed by whoever is on that team that day. Whether you saw a duty psychiatrist or whether you saw a mental health nurse, for whatever reason, they have decided that you're better treated potentially at home. I always want to say to people, it's not always the decision of the hospital to do that. It can be really difficult when you're in a vulnerable state and you want to stay in hospital to ask for it. But I feel like if you're in that position where you want to be an inpatient, you're going to have to be very specific. And I'm saying that because essentially the rules are you going to be a danger to yourself or to other people? You know, that's a really important question that they need to ask. Secondly, it's whether you have capacity. And capacity is a really big deal where psychiatry is concerned. And that is, do you have the capacity to understand what's going on around you, who you are, and how you feel? And to some degree, whilst that can feel almost ironic, because you're saying, well, actually, the capacity I have says I feel suicidal, but I understand these feelings, to some degree, that still shows that you are an individual who can potentially be worked with very effectively at home. Now, the problem I've got is I don't know whether there is any crisis team intervening at home. That's the bit that's missing. Because I want to be honest, when it comes down to psychiatric treatment, psychological treatments, at home tends to yield great results. So if a support can be created around you in your home environment, it can often lead to healing in a more, shall we say, effective way. So that's potentially why they've done it. But I don't know whether there's a bridge there and whether you're getting that crisis intervention. Now, if that's not happening, you have absolutely a right to call 999 to say that you're going to take your own life and then to say to them, I don't want to go home. And that can be really hard, but it can be really effective. Because if you're saying, I can't cope, you know, I'm not going to be able to stay sane, I'm not going to be able to promise that I'm not going to kill myself, then they're going to be able to act on that information. But it's almost about choosing your words really specifically and actually saying it very directly. Just saying, I'm not leaving this hospital. If I leave this hospital, I kill myself. Because that's very direct, isn't it? And also to say that you don't feel that you have capacity, because if you did, you wouldn't be feeling like you wanted to go somewhere and harm yourself. As ever, I'm always going to say this, if you feel like you are suicidal now, you need to call 999. And if you don't have the capacity to do that because you're scared and you don't want to do it, you can always send me a message on Facebook and I will absolutely do that for you. But just be aware that that's probably why you haven't got that inpatient opportunity. But if you want it, you can ask for that very specifically. I hope they have given you some crisis intervention. I really do. I'm glad your GP is concerned about that, and that's really helpful because your GP can act as a bridge between you and the hospital as well. So again, it might be worth speaking to them and saying how you feel and whether there's any crisis intervention occurring. And remember, as I'd always say, there are charities like Mind and Young Minds if you're younger, and obviously Samaritans, etc. So don't feel alone. There's also a shout service, which is a text service. I know a lot of young people that I talk to, they really like the fact that they can just kind of get in contact with people on the shout service and not have to have that kind of direct conversation, just text them, and that can be really helpful as well. It feels like I'm in a cyclical pattern at the moment. It feels like when I enter work, gym, groups, I feel tense, anxious, pretty intense and overwhelmed. It feels like treacle, but it does eventually pass a bit. When I enter a room, I've been told I need to intentionally familiarise myself for 5 minutes before I start feeling present and like I can participate in the moment. And it's true. Any wisdom? So I don't know who has told you that you need to familiarise yourself for 5 minutes before you start feeling present. That to me sounds like somebody who's been talking to you about a sense of, shall we say, depersonalization, derealization, a sense of not quite being in your body, and that grounding exercise to bring you back to the present, to help you kind of get your circumstances taken in, that for you is proving to be an effective method. But it feels like what you're saying is you don't feel, even though you're managing to do those things, that you're ever feeling truly at ease. That's where the tension, anxiety, the intense, overwhelming feelings, as you said. And it says it feels like treacle. That's a really interesting terminology to use, because when I hear that, it's almost like a thick, sticky sensation. So almost like things feel harder around you to kind of move through. And I really like the description of it, even though it's one that I wouldn't necessarily assume connects with anxiety, for example, but nonetheless more of a dread, I would say, in that respect. But that particular grounding exercise that you're doing is really effective. Another one that you can do, as I've talked about before, is the 5-4-3-2-1 method, which is when you go into a situation where you're feeling anxious, to bring yourself back to the present, to connect yourself with the here and now. You think 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things that you can taste, 2 things that you can touch, and 1 thing that you can imagine, or whatever it is. There are so many different things you can do, and just bring yourself back to that. Another thing that people will do is they'll, particularly in things like schema therapy, you'll find tactile possessions can be really helpful. So it might be that you go out and you find a pebble that you like the feel of, shape of, and you take that with you everywhere you go. And you do that so that you ground yourself back to the present when you're in a situation of anxiety. You can also add to that anchoring. Now, I've got on YouTube an anchoring video, and if you go on my Emma Kenny TV YouTube, there's quite a few meditations. But anchoring is where you use your thumb and finger and you visualize particular positive images, which means that when you get into a circumstance which is problematic, it might be that you start panicking a little bit, or you start feeling really anxious, you press your fingers together and it just helps to trigger a release of serotonin and a relaxation of your kind of mind and body. And that can be really well practiced. So look up anchoring, psychological anchoring as well. On top of that, it sounds like there is a little bit of social phobia and anxiety. Now, again, not everybody has 400 quid, 300, 400 quid to throw at a private psychiatrist, okay? Or to speak to an educational psychologist. Not everybody's got those options. But I always think when you have scenarios where you've constantly recognized that even though you go through the motions and you get on with things, you get things completed, if you feel like you're never quite present and you're always having to kind of act a certain way, you almost feel like you're stood behind glass. You're in it, but you don't feel like you're immersed in it. Sometimes it can be good to get an assessment, because there are individuals, again, I'm not diagnosing you for 1 second. It's not my field. I do not diagnose, and I'm certainly not qualified to give that diagnosis. But one of the things that I would say is a lot of people who function completely well in society, and then they have an assessment and they find out that they're actually on the spectrum. And that can often mean that they mask the way that they act to provide relief for everyone else around them. So a sense of, even though they feel a little bit different, they just make sure that they seem to fit and coordinate with everybody else's needs, which is pretty exhausting. And I always think to do a bit of investigation around the self, if we've got a recurrent issue, is something that can really help. However, that aside, if that isn't something that resonates with you, and just to say as well, one of the symbols and signs that I always think adds into that is if you feel overwhelmed by crowds or noises, or if people are quite stressed around you and you feel kind of those triggers that really put you on high alert, that can also be another sign. Again, anxiety can also have those kind of feelings. So I guess it's about how you reduce stress. First of all, amazing you're going to the gym. Secondly, amazing that you still go through the motions in spite of the fact that you have to manage these quite difficult feelings. That to anybody listening is something that we really want people to do. It's about continuing the actions in spite of the feelings. It's the same when somebody has OCD. We want you to just carry on going through the motions every single day, doing what you do and ignoring those kind of voices that are telling you to go and do A, B, and C. So that emotionally exposing yourself is really powerful, and you're doing that, so that's great. The rest, I would say, comes down to things like relaxation exercises. So mindful practice would be good because it's body scan, and I think that when you're very body orientated, which it sounds like you are, that can help you to really ground and figure out where you are in your body and how you're feeling within it. Guided visualization and relaxation will also help. So again, I have all of that free on my app and on my YouTube channel, but there are so many streams that you can get that are really great quality on YouTube, and you'll find something that you can connect with. But like I said, those grounding exercises are really, really helpful, and then just have a think around some of those other things I've said regarding other potentials. But like I said, I can't diagnose, and I don't know, and I wouldn't be able to say that because it's only a question and I don't have any history or information about that. Hi Emma, I've just lost my mum to cancer. Oh, I'm so sorry. First of all, how do I explain to my 5-year-old about their granny and when she's gone? He keeps pointing at a picture and kissing it. I took him to mum's house the other day and he was running around the house looking for her and calling her. It broke my heart. I want to tell him the truth, but I don't know how to go about it. Thanks, lovely. So first of all, your mum was obviously young because you only have a 5-year-old son, so you're going to feel a bit like an orphan right now. It's just the most challenging feeling, dealing with the loss of a parent, but to be young and to have a young child and to be wanting to go through all those normal, ordinary emotions of just spending time with your mum and enjoying the special bond and relationship and uniqueness that you see in grandchildren and grandparents, and to be denied that is really, really, really tough. I just want to acknowledge that, because whilst you're thinking about your own child, you're her child and you've just lost your mum, and grief is complex and challenging, and in particular when it's been through something like cancer at an age that it shouldn't be. So just to acknowledge that loss, and I hope you're getting the support and care and compassion that you absolutely deserve, and I hope there are people around you. I hope you've got brothers and sisters, or I hope your dad's around, or somebody who can kind of help to shelter the blow just a little bit and cradle you just a little bit during this awful time. When it comes down to your child, this is something that I always say, you have to be concrete. A lot of us want to soften the blow. It's human, and also a lot of it comes from kind of outmoded ideas about how to handle grief. So a lot of people will say, you know, they've gone to sleep, right? Or they're up in the stars. And please, if any of you have done this, don't see this as a judgment. But what I'm going to try to do is give you the advice that I think has the most impact with the best response and reaction for the child to inhabit that new understanding, okay? I know that a lot of people do that whole thing about being up in the stars. I know that people do things and say gone to sleep, but children are developing in a way where they haven't got the nuances. So those kind of metaphors that we use and analogies that we use, they're too complex for the brain. Remember, this is a 5-year-old child. What they know is grandma was here, grandma's not here. So if we use terminology such as grandma fell asleep, then there's a couple of things that can happen. One, when is she going to wake up? So you've not actually created the answer, you've just created more of a discussion. And then secondly, you can create fear, which is, well, if grandma went to sleep and didn't wake up, I don't want to go to sleep because I'm scared I'm not going to wake up. And if you go to sleep, mum, I'm going to be afraid that you aren't going to wake up. Can you see how those little psychological connections can be really big for children? So we want to avoid that. And if you have a religious faith, so if you believe in heaven, I think it's perfectly acceptable to discuss that with your child and to say that, for example, if you're a Christian or if you're Muslim or if you're Jewish or whatever and you have a strong faith, then I think that it's perfectly acceptable to tell your child what your faith is and what that means and what God means to you, what Allah means to you, and so on and so forth. However, when we describe death, we must, in the physical form, express it as a permanent state of being. And that can feel really brutal, but it's not. It's absolutely honest. And we shouldn't ever pull away from these conversations that are not going to happen just once. They're going to happen so many times through our lives. So you need to just be very clear and say that your mum had cancer, which is something that unfortunately some people don't get well from, and she's died, and that means that it's really sad you won't get to see her in this life. As I said, if you're an atheist, that will be it. You won't get to see her again. If you've got religious, spiritual connections, you'll see her when, in many, 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 many years, and make sure that you make it clear that in many, many, many years that you're going to go on your journey. But be clear about the death, that the body is dead and that it's sad, but that what you're going to do is you're going to spend time really collating and creating amazing memories of Grandma, so that as he gets older, he's going to be able to really relive the relationship. I think that's the beauty these days, as compared to, say, 50, 60 years ago, where we didn't have people taking lots of camera pictures. We just had those terrible ones, didn't you, that you had to send off, and then you get them back 3 weeks later and they'd all have like stickers over your face because you'd overexposed it. We didn't really have the accumulation of life. Whereas with your mother, you'll be able to keep her alive so dramatically in his mind, because you'll use the pictures, you'll use the memories, you'll create the memory boxes, do scrapbooks, anything that brings Grandma back into the room, but consistently reminds him that this is because Grandma has died. And it is challenging to have those conversations. It potentially will provoke sadness. It may provoke a little bit of anxiety around you, because if she can die, you can die. But again, you can't protect children from that. I remember my own 5-year-old's face crumpling, and I've talked about this before, when he realised one day I was going to die. And it was absolutely clear that in that moment, the overwhelming recognition that I'm an impermanent being. And even though that was painful, it was so important. And it happens, I think, with most children. Also, there's lovely books available. So one of the ones that I recognised as important to me anyway was Badger's Parting Gift. But there'll also be books about cancer and deaths around cancer. There are so many now, so maybe look at a specific one, because what your child is one at knowing is going to be that it's not going to happen to you. And again, you can't promise that. All you can do is help them work through the way that they're experiencing the world and go at the pace that they need to go. And they may ask you lots of questions. He may ask you none, and then in 3 months' time he may ask you some. Those kind of things can be really helpful to just be ready for. But I think at this moment in time, aside from the fact that you're going through your own grief, be aware that it's going to be really triggering for you to have that conversation. Do not feel guilty if you cry. Don't. I think mums and dads have got this real desire when they lose somebody that they absolutely adore to be strong for their kids. Like there's this idea that if you cry, you're going to damage them because you're the one who's meant to be in power. But it just doesn't work like that. Children understand context. So when you're talking about something that's really sad and loss that's really real for you, if you get really upset, you can say, Mummy's crying because Mummy misses Grandma. And that's a perfectly linear and logical emotional experience, isn't it? So try not to be afraid of that. But I just want to give you a hug, really, because you're thinking about everybody else, but you've gone through a massive loss. And I think that there'll be lots of people really resonating with that right now. Hi, Emma. My 12-year-old daughter doesn't want to go out. We went for a small walk, but she was really nervous and worried. I'm talking to her and supporting her as best I can. I'm scared she'll just get worse if I don't encourage her. Can you please give advice? So first of all, you're doing everything right. That's the most important thing to say, because you're absolutely ensuring that she's getting exposed to her fear. I think we have to take a step back from seeing, let's give your child as an example, okay? Let's give your child as an example. If we take her as a normal, typical kid, she should have been spending the last year absolutely surrounded by friends. She should have been experiencing her normal school experience and going through the motions of her daily life without any concern. And that's all been broken down. She's had a fear narrative pumped into her home day in, day out. And that will have caused her something called secondary vicarious trauma. When you're told as a child that you're a vector of disease and that you might kill someone that you love, what power do you have aside to try to prevent that happening? So even though you're seeing it as an internalized issue with her, which obviously her behavior seems like it's an internalized issue, if we can see it in a slightly different way and understand it as an expression of her protection, of an expression of the protection for the people that she loves, and actually the programming that's occurred for her, then as opposed to us feeling as concerned about her being an over anxious child who can't manage emotionally, you can actually say, no, this is somebody who's probably trying to create power in her world by not damaging people that she loves. So what you're doing is right. She needs to be exposed gradually to her fear. That might be going for a 10-minute walk and then a reward. It might be going for a 20-minute drive and then for a short walk and then again a reward. Lots of reassurance. You also need to talk to her about decontaminating some of those thoughts and fears that she's got, because I bet you part of it is that she's convinced that if she gets something like COVID, she's going to wipe out her family. That is the damage that we have done to children. The only way you can get through a phobia is confronting it. Now, if it gets really extreme, it is worth going to your doctors, having a conversation. Yes, it will take some time to get an appointment, but they will be able to refer you to CAMHS. And again, it may well be something that she doesn't need. You just need to keep on doing exactly what you're doing. Also, I have a few child-specific meditations on YouTube. So if you go over there and look on the meditation bit, there's one specifically for kids. And I do think that anything that helps children to just really relax and really unwind and really connect with that upper consciousness that we've all got, that might help as well. Speak to school as well. Look, I'm the first person to own it. My youngest son, because of the trauma of losing my dad to suicide, he's really struggled. He knows that I talk openly about this, and he's not going to school at all hardly because he can't deal with the triggers of maths and testing. He just can't manage it. So they're being brilliant with me, and he's getting schooled at home and he's learning and he's doing all of those things. But what's been really helpful above everything else is the fact that the school have just been so incredibly kind and compassionate, and they send a pastoral guide to speak to him whenever he goes in. So you can get school on side as well. They understand it's been a traumatizing year, so maybe explore that as well. I think that when you have those honest conversations with school providers, they genuinely get it this year. They've seen so many kids really go up with their anxiety levels, so please have a conversation with them as well. But remember, a lot of this won't be internalized issues that belong to her. There'll be externalized issues that have been swallowed because she's been told so many things that have been devastating for that 12-year-old's head. It's awful what our children have been through, and it's going to have long-term ramifications. But like I said, get her on a counselling list if you can. Definitely engage with the school. Sometimes they have pastoral support that are brilliant, like at my son's school. And most importantly, pat on the back. You're doing every single thing right. I know it's frustrating, and I know that you just want your daughter to be the happy, giggly, fun girl that she used to be, like all of us do with our kids, but she's going to need time. And also, just to additionalise, remember, it's at a very specific period of time right now. She's 12, and that means hormones and all the things that make you aware of yourself also are coming to fruition, and that can be debilitating and challenging as well. And that can also add to her seeming more anxious and you being concerned about her going out, but actually it's to do with all of those weird changes that are going on for her. But just keep getting her out and keep rewarding the behaviour, and don't bring up the behaviour when she's not going out. Try to avoid it, starve that behaviour. We don't want to give attention to that behaviour. And like I said, always speak to your GP if you're not getting anywhere, but well done for all that. A lady called, am I allowed to say the name?
You should name it.
Oh, a lady called Maria is saying she's going to take her own life. Can you give her some advice? She's saying she's going to do it tonight. Lives in Hampshire, but she isn't here to be saved. She's here to say thank you, that is all. Maria, I think the universe sometimes makes us do things that we're not really aware we're doing for the reasons that the universe wants us to do it. So you could feel all of that and you could not have written that statement, right? But sometimes the universe just doesn't have that plan for us. And it says, no, you know what, Maria, you're going to be brave and you're going to have the courage to write and you're going to express that feeling. And then, because you've expressed it and it's taken seriously, there are things that we can do now to make you safe. I always say, suicide is not about killing the self, it's about killing the life that we're living. You are not the issue. Your life might feel shitty right now. Your life might be really challenging. I don't know whether you're living in an awful situation. I don't know whether you've got an abusive partner. I don't know whether you've had some significant losses. I don't know what's creating your feeling that you don't want to be here. But what I do know is it's temporary. And that is not to disrespect or disregard your suicidality. It isn't. I'm saying that what you are feeling now, it's going to pass. And we might need help making that pass. You might need to go into hospital to make that pass. You might need to realise that the way that you're living your life, even where you live, needs to shift and change. All of that is possible. All of that has potential. But what doesn't have potential is ending your life, creating a permanent solution to a passing feeling. And don't get me wrong, when we haven't had our depression treated properly, it can be something that goes on for years. If we haven't had the therapy that we need, it could be something that repeats patterns. But I am telling you now, just as you were not suicidal a few weeks ago or a month ago or 10 years ago, you don't need to be suicidal. Again, as long as you recognise that you are both deserving of help and that there are people like me who can create that help for you. Now, the big thing is that we really need to get you an ambulance. That's what we need to do. And because I genuinely think that the universe has intervened, I think the message from me is it is not your time at all. You are absolutely deserving of help. You don't need to thank any of us, because the reason this community exists is because people like you matter. People like you have great meaning. And people like us, the people listening now, the people engaged in this, we all want you to understand that the reason that you've written that message is so that you're not alone and so that you can absolutely get the help that's required. So I would like you to please just inbox me your address, and then I will get you an ambulance in a few minutes' time. And I want you to keep saying to yourself, just for the next few minutes, I want you to keep saying to yourself, I came on here thinking that I was going to end my life, but actually I've realised that the universe has got a completely different plan for me. And what I need to do now is I need to listen, because there was a message. You wrote that, and now you've been given a message. And that message isn't to kill yourself. That message is to get the help that you need, deserve, and that we can create. So if we're going to think about it like that, you don't need to thank me for anything, what you need to do is acknowledge that that action that you took has created a consequence of possibility, and let us be that possibility and accept that intervention, because sometimes that's what happens. Synchronicity. People connect in that moment, that perfect moment where everything can change for the better. So I want you to really think about my words before I finish, okay? I want you to think about those words, and we'll get you the help that you need and deserve. I'm going to end it on that particular one, just so Maria can obviously send me details. I want to say thank you to everybody for listening as ever. It's been a really mixed bag of questions tonight, which is something that I massively appreciate, and something that always reminds me of how diverse all of our needs are, all in the same moment. I think that we're at a strange moment in time. One of the things that is really striking for me at the moment is the mistrust that people have in the world around them. And I think it's really impacting on so many of us. So I wrote the other day that maybe things were getting better to some degree because I'd been out, and pretty much most people were saying it's just a ruse, it's not going to change, we're all going to get locked down again. And there was a lot of negativity around that, which I fully understand. And I also understand why, because when things have been dangled in front of you and snatched away, and when promises have constantly been made and then been broken, it's human condition to question, it's a human condition to be concerned. But I just want to remind every single one of you that human beings are infinitely powerful. Every single one of us, every single one of us. It is us, it is the people of the UK, it is the people of the country that you live in. We elect people to power. They work for us, not the other way around. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. And this year it's felt easy to in the last 12 months. But just remember your power. And then remember how many other people feel so similarly to you. Because when you start recognizing that that isn't a single ripple, it's a tidal wave, it reduces that fear. We are all going to get back to a point of normality because we will demand it and because we need it. And you have the Royal College of Psychiatrists talking very openly about this now. So remember, there are forces of good on side around mental health and wellness, but nobody becomes mentally healthy and well unless they stay, unless they work through it, unless they recognise that there is going to be a better day. Whatever that day is and however we create it, we know that we're on that journey together. So I just want you to be clear that for anybody feeling suicidal right now, this is not the time, the place, the space to go ahead with those actions. It is not the time, because you cannot assess what is really going on in the world for you right now. Too much has happened. We need to de-stress, decontaminate, decompress all of those feelings that are leading to feeling overwhelmed. Much of it does not belong to you. It's the wider world that you've ingested, and we now need to evacuate that from ourselves, okay? Okay, I'll see you on Wednesday. Take care, guys.